906 Outdoors is brought to you in part by Orion Hunting Products. Morels are long gone, but that doesn't mean there's not mushrooms to pick.
Today we're going to be out looking for chanterelles. Chanterelles, next to morel, probably the most commonly known and most popular of all wild mushrooms.
9 million acres of forest, 1,700 miles of continuous shoreline, 4,300 lakes, 12,000 miles of streams, more than 300 waterfalls, 15 counties, 2 time zones, and 1 area code. Welcome to the Upper Peninsula. Welcome to 906 Outdoors. Outdoors is brought to you by Cooking Wild Seasonings. Make it fresh, make it yours. Late summer is a great time to get out in the woods, and picking mushrooms is a great reason to do it. Once again hooked up with Matt from Shiitake Creek to talk mushrooms.
And I've got a few basic items along with me today. One's a 5-gallon bucket. This one has holes in it. I like that for airflow. The holes are optional. Next one is a mesh laundry bag. Unlike morels, which are really popular in the springtime, and you're lucky to find a handful or so for most people, chanterelles occur in very large numbers. Usually where there's 1 or 2, if you search around hard enough and a couple hundred feet in each direction, probably fill a big basket. So I like this because the bag is breathable and the air comes in through the side through the holes, and that allows it kind of keeps them fresher. And then of course the mesh bag makes it easy to pull out, etc., but also kind of preserves the integrity of them, so they're not getting smashed and banged around. And the bucket also protects them in that regard. Good old-fashioned walking stick, because if your knees don't hurt now, keep walking without a walking stick long enough and they will. Good clean water, and I've got a field guide in the back as always. So we're going to drop down this hill, get into some dense hardwoods, and see what we can find. Chanterelles really love good drained soil, and then their spores, since they stick around for so long, they have a long fruiting season, their spores wash down continually. So usually you find them on the top or midway through the slope, and then you find them all the way downhill from there. So you're looking for little yellow mushrooms. They can actually be pretty big too. So chanterelles, like oaks and beech in particular, they're found in association with other trees, pines, hemlocks, etc. But really, if you want to put money in the bank on where to find them, find oak trees. A nice sloped ground. Doesn't have to be steep slope. The slower the slope, the better. They like that drained soil. So we're in an area that has a lot of oaks still, which is awesome because oak wilt is definitely taking its toll on our woods right now. And so chanterelles live in symbiosis or mycorrhizal relationship with the tree, meaning that the fine filaments of fiber that make up the mycelium of the mushroom itself, the mushroom as we think of it is actually a fruit, weave through the soil. And so underneath of us in every direction, there are miles and miles of this mycelium. And it attaches with the tree roots. The trees have evolved to have docking sites on the roots itself. So they're basically one organism, if you really want to think of it that way. And so the tree trades sugar created from photosynthesis for water and nutrients. All plant life is dependent on fungi. Without fungi, there are no plants. The plants evolved from fungi and depend exclusively on them. So when they trade these sugars from the photosynthesis for the trace minerals, which can be moved over miles and miles of ground to these trees, that partnership gives the chanterelle like a healthy boost. And because it knows that it's a healthy relationship, it'll put off fruits and try to colonize a bigger area, becoming larger and larger and larger. So the older the woods, generally the better as well. Pretty as a picture. Oh yeah.
Today's show is brought to you in part by Rapid River Knife Works, home of Michigan's largest custom knife factory showroom.
We're in and around these oak trees looking. This is a spot we know pays. And this time of year, when they're first coming up in mid-July or so, pretty hard to see. So you just see them poking through. They usually occur in singles, but I've seen them up to 9 in the same place. when you look at the gills have forking on them. These aren't technically gills, they're ridges. And they're blunt, they're not really sharp. They run down decurrent or halfway down the stipe or the stem, and then they stop. And you see the cap has a nice wavy margin to it. When you're picking specimens, usually smaller is better. There's very low chance that this guy is gonna be totally eaten up with bugs. I prefer to cut them, but it really doesn't matter whether you cut or pull, as long as you don't bring up a whole bunch of dirt. So I want to quickly take my toothbrush. Old toothbrush is the best thing I've found that works, and get that dirt off, because if they go in the bucket clean, they come out of the bucket clean. But what I do is I push down and twist to pull them this way, cut the stem. Once again, real quick brush. 2 seconds there saves you 10 minutes later. They're not always gonna come off perfect, but do the best you can with what you have where you are. And out here in the woods, this toothbrush is pretty much the best way. There we go. We're gonna look around because, like I said, where there's one, there's almost always a lot more. Chanterelles are one of those mushrooms that kind of spring up in the deer's wake as well. Because deer like them so much, and they do eat a lot of them, of course they deposit the spores from the chanterelles on the back end as they walk along the trails through the habitat. You see the darkening on the cap there? Around the edges. That's because it's dry. It's really dry this year. All our rain's coming at once down here, and so it's wet enough to push everything up, but not to keep it in perfect pristine condition like we'd like at the same time. I'm just looking for little spots that are poked up, and it's always easier to get down low and look high like this, because if these leaves the mushroom sits underneath this leaf like this, well, it's hard to see it from directly overhead, and it's hard to see it looking down the hill. But if you come up the hill and this is underneath those leaves, all of a sudden you can see it. So you wouldn't see that standing over the top of it or looking downhill, but you would definitely see it looking from downhill up the hill. This is a different mushroom. You can see it has some similar characteristics, right? We have a little bit of forking going on these gills, but you notice these gills are more like a knife edge. And so when we look at them side by side, you see that these run down and that they're blunt. They're almost rounded over on top versus these sharp gills. These gills come to the stipe or the stem and stop, versus the blunt ridges of a chanterelle run down it. We also notice a chanterelle has a bruising reaction, which means that if you kind of manhandle it a little bit, it'll turn a darker color, almost like a rust red, pretty quick, and you can kind of see it starting to play out there already. And so that's a dead giveaway. Obviously the color difference, one white, one is yellow to orangish. There is a lookalike called the jack-o'-lantern. Umphalatus illudens would be the taxonomy name. And it's more of a fall mushroom, but it can, under free conditions, occur at the same time as the chanterelle. It's not extremely uncommon to see them together. The main difference is the gills, totally different. And the jack-o'-lantern grows from a clump. Unlike these, which are coming up, maybe side by side or in a small clump, it is usually a lot of mushrooms in one clump. Another dead giveaway between the two is that one grows from the earth and the dirt, that mycorrhizal relationship we talked about between the trees, connecting them all together. And the other one grows from wood, like stumps and woody refuse. So there's definitely two different things going on there. One out of the earth, the other one out of the wood. The way they grow, as far as like being a lot of mushrooms in one cluster. Really neat thing about the imposter or the jack-o'-lantern mushroom is if you put a really bright spotlight on it and then take it off, it glows in the dark. Right? And so it's called bioluminescence, and it's a pretty neat mushroom in that regard for you know, the science value. Small kids love that parlor trick, etc. And it's always fun to do once. But you don't want to eat those. They won't kill you, but they'll make you wish that you wouldn't have eaten them for sure. You'll remember that 24 hours. So when we cut open the chanterelle, you guys see that it's white on the inside. There's no bug holes in here. That's really good. So why I like them at the small age is that they're not full of bugs. I'm not worried about a little slug damage because that happens, right? But I really want to make sure that there isn't maggots inside. They may look fine now. Take them home, put them in the fridge, and a couple of days later, you open that bag or that box inside your fridge and there are maggots everywhere in all the mushrooms because you didn't take the time to split it and check it. So let's look around and see if we can find some more. A lot of times what I'll do, and I like the bucket system for this reason, is because it's like home base, is once I find that first one, I'll set the bucket where I found it, and then I'll start working a circle around it, like concentric circles or spiral pattern. Getting just a little bit wider, looking harder. So you can see this guy has a little bit of slug hole in there. So he's taking up residence. He's made a nice little circuit in there. If you can see, he went through here too. So I'm gonna trim it off. It's still good. There's no worm holes or anything. So I'm gonna cut it open just to make sure Mr. Slug isn't still in there. And he's not, so we're good. So like I was saying earlier, right here on the deer trail, because deer do love them, right? This one's a little dry, but we're still gonna take it. It's just dry from the wind and the sun. Another one right there. And so kind of when you find one, the whole thing slows down. But because the deer eat them, and then walk on these trails and deposit the spores, and by deposit, I think you all know what I mean, right? They basically are seeding these everywhere they go. So.
906 Outdoors is brought to you in part by Blades Bait and Tackle, your year-round connection to fishing bait Enoch.
Of course, there are thousands upon thousands of different kinds of the mushrooms in the world. Some of them are pretty familiar. This is one you may have seen before. This is Russula or Russula. Russula avictica. Notice that second part, avictica. If you eat it, what do you think your body is going to do? It's going to evict it. This is another one of those technically poisonous, but not poisonous enough to kill you so much as make you violently ill. So red cap on top, white flesh. This thing's noticeably crumbly, right? And this is gonna play in our second mushroom we're gonna hope to find today, which is the lobster mushroom. And it actually parasitizes or parasitically attacks this mushroom and the white mushroom. This is a Lactitarius. You see we got slug here. Before you freak out on slugs anytime you're mushroom picking, they are the primary spore spreaders of the forest. So we all know what slug slime is and how gross it feels. That's like a glue. If you've ever seen the slug trails on the forest floor, it kind of look like a sparkly, glittery thing. So they're literally taking these spores and gluing them onto the leaves and other things in place up the branches, etc. So they are the primary spore spreaders. So if you appreciate mushrooms and you love mushrooms, it's inevitable you're going to have a beef with slugs. And before you do get really mad and put out Sluggo or whatever, just know that they're doing the most work to help you as a mushroom lover. So anyway, back to the lobster mushroom. So it is another type of fungi that attacks one of these two species, either the Lactitarius or the Russula or Russula. And it turns it in the process from something inedible to not only something that's edible, but it's highly delicious and very sought after. So we're gonna look at these. Seeing both of these here is a good sign that we're gonna find the lobster mushroom, which is bright orange on the outside and kind of looks like a boiled lobster. So this is a lobster mushroom. Genus would be Hypomyces lactiflorum. Like I was talking about earlier, this is two mushrooms. So this is either A, a Russula, or B, a Lactitarius that has been attacked by another mushroom. Now this one's just kind of an amorphic mass. Generally it has more of a mushroom shape, and we'll hopefully find a couple here in a second. Usually there's one, there's more. This thing is enormous. As we can see the color on the outside, definitely looks like a cooked lobster. And then when we cut it open, we see it's bone white on the inside. And this one's nice and pretty, no bugs, no anything, despite it being dirty. And that's one of the pitfalls of this mushroom, is that it's oftentimes very dirty, but it's definitely worth your time to spend a few minutes cleaning it up, because this is the meatiest of all the wild mushrooms. This texture is so dense, you know exactly what you have in your mouth, and it has a nice flavor, slightly sweet like seafood. The name lobster is really more about the appearance than the taste. But if you let it go bad, it'll have a smell like rotten lobster. And so those two kind of pair up in that regard. A lot of people use this to pad out lobster or to substitute lobster in a seafood dish. And I have chefs that use this quite a bit for that reason. So if they're making like a lobster bisque, they'll either add this in addition to or in substitution of the lobster. So it stretches your budget further. We like what we call turf and turf at our house, which is basically lobster mushroom with steak. You know, it's not surf and turf technically, but it's turf and turf. and it's absolutely wonderful. Like I said, this mushroom is so dense, so meaty, that it's just wonderful. And this is quickly becoming one of those mushrooms that of yesteryear had more of a quiet surrounding it, but now it's definitely become one of those mushrooms that chefs are after and that the home foodie is after as well. And as a mushroom picker, it makes me happy to see that they're finally getting what they deserve, which is a top spot on the menu. Here's another one. This guy's a little bit smaller. They're not always bone red. This one's orange. This is more typical. You can see where the gills would have been or the blunt ridges would have been. And that's dead giveaway that this is lobster, you know, break it in half. This one's got a couple little worm spots in it. So we'll eat that tonight or not at all. So this one, a little further along, you guys see that dark red color on this? If you smell that, yeah, like a seafood, yeah. And so it gets more prominent with age, you know, the darker that red gets. So I'm gonna trim some of that off. Still good at this point, right? It hasn't molded or anything like that, so we're still good there. This is more atypical of your lobster. It looks like a lobster tail, right? So first things first, trim off the dirt. Then I'm gonna find this area right here that's soft, trim that away, back to where it's firm again. So I'm gonna brush that one up. This is absolutely beautiful. I wish I could find 100 of these today. You can see, once again, nice and white, no bugs. It just rained a couple days ago, so these are young and fresh. With these don't really soak up water, so you can use water to clean the lobsters. With chanterelles, they don't soak up as much water as like a morel will, etc. But if you can dry clean them, that's the best way to do it, you know, if you don't have to soak them in water. I always, the saltwater soak thing I never really got because it doesn't do a whole lot as far as like getting bugs out. Just submerging them in water is gonna do that alone. I like the little sprayer in my sink. Just spray some cold water on it to get those last few pieces of dirt off. And once again, it's just dirt. Dirt don't hurt.
"906 Outdoors" is brought to you in part by Christ, your Northwoods neighborhood store.
There's no mushrooms so poisonous that touching them and then touching your mouth is gonna kill you. Even if you touch that and immediately begin to eat blueberries, even if it was the most deadly mushroom out here, which is the member of the destroying angel complex of the Galerina, there's no, like, it doesn't work like that. You have to physically ingest it. Most of them are liver toxins. And so it has to enter your bloodstream in pretty decent dosage for you to get poisoned. So I always tell people the difference between poison and medicine is dosage, how much you take. Now, obviously with poisonous mushrooms, there's no such thing as dosage. Don't eat them. But you don't have to be so overly cautious to wash your hands between touching a mushroom. And there are reasons too, like you never know if a deer pooped right here and E. coli is on that mushroom, etc. And you always want to cook your mushrooms. You never want to eat them raw. Always cook your mushrooms at 160 degrees, just like a good meat. And that's primarily because they're made of chitin, which is like our fingernails and our hair and a bug's exoskeleton or the outside of a lobster. They're all made of the same thing. Our body doesn't metabolize that until it gets cooked. Once it gets cooked, a chemical change occurs and it becomes highly digestible for our body. So generally speaking, if you eat them raw, it's going to be like eating a lot of fiber. It's going to clean you out, so to speak, right? So don't do that. Definitely cook them. There are two things generally with mushrooms that I feel like make people sick more than anything else. One is if there's mold on the mushroom. That's obviously going to make you ill. The second one is when you cook with oil, it's very important that that oil is hot in the pan. There are some mushrooms, like chicken of the woods, for example, in particular, that will just soak up oil, especially if that oil is not hot. If that oil's hot when it goes into it, it doesn't soak up a whole lot. But if it's not hot when it goes into it, it'll soak it up. Therefore, you look at the pan, you think, I need more oil, so you put more in it. Before you know it, you have a stomach full of oil and mushrooms, and then you get sick and you think it was the mushroom that made you sick. More often than not, it's the mold or the oil that made you sick, especially if you soaked up a lot of oil. And so for that reason, we always tell people when you try, whether it's food allergy, oil, or mold, when you're trying a new mushroom, always try a little bit and wait a day. And then if agrees with you and you think it was delicious and you have no ill effects, go for it, as long as you know what you're eating. So this is crown tip coral. It's more of a transition mushroom between morel season and chanterelle season in particular. And it's called crown tip because if you look at the very tip top of that coral branching structure, it looks like a little castle, or almost like the top of a rook on a chess piece. So crown tip corals are peppery tasting, and they maybe make the finest of all the pickled mushrooms, in my opinion. They're decent eating fresh too. And so while we're talking about cooking mushrooms and preserving mushrooms, etc., chanterelles are pretty easy to put up and preserve. First of all, there's really two methods for preservation when it comes to mushrooms. One is saute and freeze. And what I mean by that is you're gonna cook them maybe 3/4 of the way or so. And once I see the majority of the steam is gone from the pan and I start to hear that pop and sizzle, I know that I've cooked out enough moisture to freeze them. Because if you think about it on a microscopic level, the cell walls are full of water. So if you freeze them before you cook them, they just expand and burst and they turn into mush basically. However, if you get rid of that moisture first or reduce it down either by sauteing or through dehydration, when you put it in the freezer, it stays for a long time. This is a great way to preserve it. The other way is either through putting them in the sun or having a massive amount of wind on them. You can dehydrate them, or you can put them on your dehydrator. I like to rehydrate my chanterelles personally in white wine, and it gives them an incredibly deep wine flavor in them. Of course, water, chicken broth, mushroom broth. It's really your imagination. Any warm fluid or to rehydrate them is gonna work just fine.
Feel free to join us on Facebook or visit us at 906outdoors.com. Thanks for watching, and we invite you to join us next week for another adventure right here on 906 Outdoors.